Someone tell me, when is it my turn? When do I get a turn for myself? Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome today to my channel. I'm going to talk about backlist books, specifically my project the last year or so of trying to read more backlist books to reflect on how I'm doing, but also the bigger picture of why do I read backlist books? Why do I care? Why should you care? Or should we care at all? Should we even be thinking about when a book is published? Is that relevant to what books we pick up, what books I pick up? And do I have any right to tell you what to read? That's a big question. I'm going to attempt to answer those questions in this video. So, for those of you not in the know, to clarify, around beginning of last year, 2024, I'd made a project for myself to try and read a majority of backlist books. I don't think I succeeded, or I guess it depends how you define it. And I defined it as specifically trying to reduce the books published in the 2020s to being, I think, a quarter or maybe even 20% of the total of what I read. And then from there, I think I had made specific fractions for other years, like the 2010s being, again, less than a third or less or something. Just trying to progressively make myself read books that aren't quite as new or flashy. The idea here, of course, is simply that I have a clear bias towards newer books. If you look at the years that books are published that I read, and most people, to be honest, at least on BookTube, you often, almost always see new releases or books that released in the last couple of years. And in a lot of ways it makes sense. They are the flashiest, the ones who are present in our mind, the ones that we hear most about, therefore the ones we're most constantly thinking about. What I wanted to do, or rather what I was concerned about, was whether or not there was a bias, that sort of the exposure made us, or rather it made me, I'm projecting it to be fair, made me pick up books or assume they might be better just because they're newer, or I had that extra flashiness of being relevant. I don't think I'm explaining it very clearly here. It's a great start to this video. But basically, I just felt like there was a bias there, clear bias, clear motivation to be relevant on this platform, but in general, to talk about new books. But also, it's like a FOMO. There are so many shows I haven't watched because I wasn't there right when it came out. I haven't watched The Wire yet, and I need to, and I know that, and I hate myself for not watching it. But at the same time, there were shitty shows that I know are going to be shitty that I'll start just because, I want to experience it as it's happening. And don't ask, why do we do that? I don't know. But for me, I just really want to ask the question, and maybe should I try to read more books? I did read more backlist books. Let's get into it. I wanted to try this project to just try to see, is there any objective difference in the quality of books or the quality experience for me when I try to pick up more backlist books? That in and of itself is a nuanced discussion because there are some flaws in my approach, which I will get into. But at the end of the day, the takeaway is, to be honest, it's not a big of a difference. What you're going to see is the average rating for older books are going to be about the same for the newer books. I looked at the books that I've read data, not just the last couple of years. I did for all of this year, like up through like June through the beginning of 2024, when I basically started the project. And then I also looked at all the data I have since I think 2019 when I started logging book data. Let's start with just looking at publications. How old was a book when I read it? This is different than publication year because obviously look right in 2019, that is 0 years old, was published in 2019, but if I had read it this year, it would be 6 years old. So with that in mind, what I did here was I sort of looked at a few arbitrary ranges between 2019 to 2021, which is in red, between 2022 and 2023, and then 2024 onward in green. And the age of the book, which is to say years from the date that I read it, when it was published, is on the x-axis. On the y-axis is basically normalized total. So if you think of it as the percentage, so like for less than 5 years, between almost 60 to 40% of what I read was within the 5 years of when I read it. I guess you could say on average about 50%. Now you do see a change, which means that thankfully there was at least some impact on that goal, because I didn't get to the goals that I set for myself of being as strict as I wanted to, but it made a dent in that number, which I am happy with. I'm happy to have motivated myself to try older things. We're going to talk about some ratings in a bit too, but my point is that you can see the number of new books, so that is say within the last 5 years published, is substantially lower than the last several years, last 5 years, I guess, because I tried to avoid them, or at least make myself read more backlist before I picked up a new book, which I found was actually the easiest way of doing it. Like, I want to read that new book so badly. So it's motivation for me to quickly read these backlist books. But that also had negative effect when I would pick up books I know that were probably going to be bad but easy to read because they were backlists. Again, we get into that when we get to ratings. But you also see an uptick in the number of older books. It's not too much of a surprise that it was still in the last 20 years or so that I read a book, which is say 2000 on onward. I am a little surprised, perhaps, that more of them were 10 to 20 years instead of within the last 5 to 10 years, which I feel like would have satisfied the role it had for myself. The more recent it is, that's still going to be sort of a more recent appeal to it. I do think that's a fair assessment. And yet I didn't do that. And then when you get beyond that, so 20 plus years, really, my backlist reading didn't change. You can see that when I had this rule for myself, I took the easy way. Where really in the last 20 to 30 years, it was so much easier to pick up books basically in this millennia than it was to go into really older books, where you really get into a larger jumps in, I think, style and just cultural norms and you requiring a bit more focus, a bit more attention on my part, which is, of course, I think another reason why I avoid backlist books, specifically older backlist classics. But that's perhaps a takeaway that I need to have from here is maybe I should try be aiming for specifically classics or books that are at least more than 2 decades outside of this millennia. Hey, that's a good way of looking at it. I could still need to improve my classics, at least rather I want to. I say need to. My idea is the perfect uniformity, which is absurd, and it's just purely just a weird obsession that I don't think has a real merit, other than the fact that I don't want to avoid reading backlist books because I don't want to avoid reading classics. I think there's some value in there. The value am I going to get? I'm not quite sure. Like which classics are worth reading? It's a bigger conversation that frankly I'm not prepared to have. Okay, now let's take a look at the ratings. Basically, the average rating for books published in different decades or years published. I took the average and I took the standard deviation within that. And the takeaway here is there is no pattern. It's clear that the quality of a book is not defined by the year that's published, which I don't think was a reasonable assessment anyways. I think part of my mind was, it's older, it's had more time to be vetted, to be assessed. But I think you can make the same argument against it towards newer books where, I'm familiar with the people making the assessments, the people in the community that have some insight into what they think about books, how they think about books, which is to say I know who I can trust and who I can't trust. And in that sense, I could justify reading newer books because they're just getting more attention from the people whose opinions I feel like I have some insight into. But realistically, it's just not a major difference. The difference in the rating across the decade just doesn't matter. If I want to read older books, it can't be because they're better. It has to be just because I want to not bias myself towards recent history. The value I get from reading isn't just, I guess, the raw excitement of something new, being up to date with culture, I guess. It's also just that attachment, that connection to these older voices, to these minds, like a traveling back in time. I said that before in this channel way back when. And that's one major reason why I don't want to forget it. I just feel like there is still value to be had in those older voices, especially ones that I think are less uplifted, the ones that are more obscure. And I think maybe that should be a goal for myself, more obscure older books. As an audio book reader, that doesn't bode well for me if I try for that goal. Let's just quickly compare this to changing it again to years. There's not much of a difference. Basically, takeaway, it's the same. No difference in average ratings. I guess you could say that the super old books, the super ancient classics, objectively, those I had the hardest time with, and objectively are the worst books. But then again, I didn't mention this, on the bottom of these graphs is the number of books that are being analyzed or averaged. So for older books more than 200 years, being published 200 years ago or more, there's only 4 of them in the last 5-6 years that I've read. Does it say something about that period, about ancient literature just being harder to assess, or as ancient literature, just older literature, or does it just say that I'm picking the wrong stuff?
So I caught a typo. It turns out there were only 3 books that were published more than 200 years ago, and that actually fixed the anomaly, such that the average becomes 3.75 with a standard deviation of 0.75, which basically means they're no worse than the other series, any other books. And to be clear, that doesn't even include rereads of backlists. It just further illustrates books can be great regardless of when they're published.
It's kind of interesting to break this down even more, I think, into just more even increments of, say, 5-year periods. And there's not much I want to take away from this, just because, again, the number of books per year are much lower. I should mention there's some bias here. Like, when you look at the year 1840, 1844, I wonder if that's the year that Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol was published, because I've read that maybe every year since it's been published, since I started my BookTube channel. So in a way, that's probably being added into that multiple times, meaning that's probably biasing it upwards. When I originally recorded this, I basically said I thought it was safe to assume that I like newer books more often, but I don't think that's true. I think, especially the overview, the less granular review, really tells us that the truth is I can love a book regardless of when it was published. I just gotta find the right book for me. And I think part of that is breaking away from what I've been told I should like, especially when it comes to classics. There are some classics I love, some I've never heard of but ended up loving, others that I'm told I should love but I just can't. And I think that's the secret. Let's go back to looking at the years that I read them. And now we're looking instead at the averages. The x-axis is, again, just a number of years since it was published is when I read it. What I want to focus on here is the fact that, especially in the 10 to 40 year range, the average rating is substantially lower than the 3 or 4 years beforehand. If anything, this project that I've had for myself didn't improve my reading, because I have a habit of fixating on the goal and not on the objective. Because like I said before, I would pick up older books that are easy, that I know will be easy, because I just want to satisfy that need of reading an older book. And it's a really hollow approach, and I'm not unaware. And it's one of those things where I'm trying to think about ways of just improving my reading, and instead I game it, and I what's the fucking point? Nobody made me do this. I'm doing it for myself. So it's an interesting psychological experiment, I guess, to look at this. Maybe perhaps again it's just a reason not to make goals for myself, because I'm just gonna fuck it up. Just remind myself, Josh, read more backlist books. If you see something that's older, and it seems interesting, maybe prioritize it a little bit more. Try to prioritize it. And that's the best thing I can do. I don't think I can stick to this, read 3 backlist books before you read a new one. It's just not sustainable. And then I get in this mindset of need to read something easy, because the truth is just that when I'm not feeling like reading something heavy, I will find the easiest thing possible, even if I don't think I'll love it. And I think there is a better balance of finding things that I might enjoy that would be easy. Yeah. So moving forward, what will this mean for me? I don't know. I'm going to still try to read more backlist books. I think if something is older, especially if I'm taking recommendations from people, I'm going to go out of my way of probably considering a book more strongly if I hear something from people whose opinions I trust, that I either haven't heard of or that I know that it's older. The thing is that while I love taking in book content, there is a mix of different things, different books you experience, but there's always that sort of overlay of the most popular stuff being reiterated. While that is obviously what I think gets us to read a lot of new books, is that we hear so much about that. It's like an advertisement for those books constantly. There are the older ones I think fall through the cracks, where we're looking for things that will just latch on to us and not thinking about why does the book latch on. Well, part of it, of course, is the advertisement that's happening constantly when we consume the same content or the same books being talked about nonstop. So I think part of it is just me taking a step back and thinking about this book is new, or at least new to me, or they're not has been spoken about as much by other people. So perhaps that's the reason I should give it a try. If I trust this person, maybe I should be focusing on that rather than the stuff that in the long term I find myself fixating on. Which is just to say, not to read books I don't think I'm going to like or that don't appeal to me the most. Rather, it's just to force myself to give more attention to these books that I know I won't get more attention to otherwise, because it's only going to be fed to me by more obscure instances, more obscure booktubers, one random discussion or something like that. And I think hopefully I'm making sense. It's about trying to allow myself to be exposed to things that I think I'll like. And if I'm going to like it, I think I'll be able to figure it out. It's a matter of trying to find a way to make social media work for me. YouTube is, of course, a form of social media. So I guess this is more than just a discussion of backlist books. This is a discussion of what is advertised to us by booktubers and what is recycled, what is new, and what is worth reading, and how do we get ourselves to read things that are worth reading beyond just things that are flashy, even if flashy can and often does correlate with things worth reading. Am I making sense? I think that's the takeaway. I really rambled so much in this video, but I feel like I've accomplished something, which is to say, get a takeaway from this project. If you watch this to the end, I appreciate you. I imagine I'm going to have a hard time editing my thoughts into a coherent narrative. But if you enjoyed it, please give it a like and let me know your thoughts on the project, on my thoughts of how to approach reading backlist books or just deciding what books to read when it comes to what we consume on BookTube. And otherwise, have a great day, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.